Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 33. And this one is a suggestion from my friend AI, and we're going to do the Glorious Revolution. But in order to give people a bit of time to join the stream, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new gods, sullen peoples, have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love and heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come down to search your manhood through all of thankless years. No age with give or wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Go and check out his YouTube channel if you like good music. Good evening, ladies and gents. Now, I know I said on our last stream that we were going to be doing a Trafalgar Day stream today, but I then saw that we can actually do one closer to the date of Trafalgar Day, and so my friend AI here stepped into the breach and said, let's do the Glorious Revolution of 1688. So that's what we're going to do. This is going to be very much AI stream because this is not a subject of any sort of expert on. So AI, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Iron Duke. So, not so long ago, we did a stream, Iron Duke, with Apostolic Majesty, as a special guest, and we looked at Cromwell, talked a bit about the English Civil War, and
AI, let me just say, I did in fact invite Apostolic Majesty to this stream, but sadly, he is busy this evening, so he wasn't available. Sorry,
yeah,
AI. Carry on.
no, and well, we talked about, of course, the result in the execution of Charles I and the establishment of the Commonwealth, the Republic under Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell, and then his son, and then of course, as we know, we had the now bridging that to, you had the Restoration under Charles II, who was invited back, and of course his, the family, the Stuarts, were also invited back. Now Charles didn't have a legitimate male heir. He had quite a few illegitimate children, one of which we will mention, because he plays quite an important role before the Glorious Revolution, the Earl of Monmouth, who we'll mention shortly. But as a result, and then Charles the second, he had daughters, which again, you know, we'll mention throughout. But Charles II died. And as the story goes, on his deathbed, he converts to Roman Catholicism. And James, who was his brother, was already a known Catholic. And for many Whigs and many Protestants in England and in Scotland, and bearing in mind, it's important to remember that at this point, the British Isles, excluding Ireland, of course, but was overwhelmingly Protestant. Numbers vary. I've seen some numbers which I think is, for England, it was 95%. I don't think it was that high. I think there was, in regions, particularly in the northwest Lancashire region, there were quite strong Catholic, maybe even crypto Catholics who in secret, but there was still a strong areas of strong Catholicism, particularly amongst the nobility. There's many manors, many old manors, and many manor houses where you have like the secret Catholic prayer rooms and things like that, which there's a lot of them. There's one near me which you can go to. So there was a lot of sympathies with Catholicism among the aristocracy and maybe the upper gentry, sort of these sort of middle class types.
Priest holes and stuff like that. AI, yeah, where
Yeah,
people used to be
priest.
able to, yeah.
Yeah,
Just to let people know, I have actually invited half a dozen people to the stream. We'll see who comes on. I hope one or two will, because I always think that intelligent questions even will make the stream better. And as I said, I'm no expert on this subject at all. I can see, because I'm not stupid, that there were pros and cons to the so-called Glorious Revolution.
yeah. I mean,
that's as far as my position on this historical event really goes.
I'm going to try and be neutral. I mean, there are a lot of people, particularly, and I've spoken to, I've actually talked about this subject with probably back 5 years ago with a chap called Plantagenet, and I think it was I forgot her name now. It's like something Brown's bookcase. And she's
Okay.
maybe someone in chat will remember, but very much I mean, Catholic reactionary types, and so of course they are very critical of the Whigs Whiggish interpretation, as they would put it, of the Glorious Revolution, and the criticisms.
Correct me if I'm wrong, AI, and I'm going to be guided by you on this subject
Yeah,
because I just don't know a lot about the 17th century. It's not a century that has ever really attracted me very much.
yeah,
Like I know a fair bit about Elizabethan times, and I know a reasonable amount about the 18th century. The 17th century is just, it's always been like a period of history which has just not attracted me for whatever reason. Um, but you know, even I can see that the Glorious Revolution was probably the ending of real monarchy in Britain. It put the monarch firmly under Parliament.
yes. I mean, at this time, you had in France Louis, the famous sun god king,
The
and bearing
Sun
in mind,
King, yeah, yeah.
yeah, the Sun King, as he would be known, and he would use symbols of similar to Sol Invictus actually in which is of course was a Roman cult
Hmm.
back in the sort of late Roman period before the adoption of Christianity, but symbols like that. And as you know, we talked about in previous streams the French kingdom. This was a point where France was becoming, particularly under Louis, a more centralized state. He was definitely far more autocratic um, in the sense than previous kings. He one of the things he's known for, and most people who it's sort of revealed in education and uh, documentaries that they like to talk about, is he built obviously the Palace of Versailles just
Hmm.
outside Paris, as a way of getting all the any potential road dukes, earls, or marquises or figures like that into his, he sort of keeps them in his palace, like almost like a prison, as a way of controlling any rogue magnates within the kingdom. And so under his rule, France became quite centralized. They had um uh interests on the in the the Spanish Netherlands. So that's like parts of modern day Belgium and the Netherlands. Um, and as we'll see at this point, also during this period, there is this um, staunch Catholic reaction in France against Protestantism, especially the Huguenots, who at this time would be expelled from France. Many of them would leave. 40,000 of them would settle in the southeast, particularly in London. And then, of course, many.
We're told, AI, that this is, you know, similar to modern mass third world immigration into Britain, which of course it wasn't, uh, because it was 50,000 people over a century. Um, so, you know, less than half the number that come in every year to Britain these days. And of course, they were northwest Europeans, so they were quite similar in culture to the British people. And you could look at such luminaries. The late Lady of Shalott was a descendant of French Huguenots. Nigel Farage is a descendant of French Huguenots. The British commander in chief in the Anglo Zulu War of 1879, Lord Chelmsford, was a descendant of French Huguenots. These were not very alien people relative to the people in Britain at that time. Sorry.
Yeah, you can't really compare them to someone from the Orient or the Far East or anything like that.
Or Africa,
Oh,
or yeah,
Africa.
yes,
Yeah,
indeed not, indeed
yeah.
not.
yeah, and also relatively speaking, I mean, given the population back then, I mean, it would have been. It would have been if you were in London, yeah, it would have been noticeable that you got the French Huguenots, but it wouldn't have upended society, or anything
No.
crazy like that. It wouldn't have upended.
The other place they went, AI,
Oh,
apart
of course,
from
the
Britain,
colonies.
was to South Africa, where they
Yeah.
blended with the Cape Dutch, and you will
Mm,
find many Afrikaners to this day have French Huguenot names. But yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
And also during this time, it's, I will mention, during this period, you have of course, the colonies in Virginia had been around for good part of over just over 80 years at this point. You had the New England colonies, and so a lot of would along with people from Britain would go to the colonies, um, and uh, I was just trying to think. Oh, I'm probably Canada, into the in modern day Canada, the Hudson Bay area.
New France, where as it was known in those days, of course.
Yeah, New France, Nova Scotia. Yeah, you would have that. Oh, I guess what they called it Arcadia back then. Probably when they not Nova Scotia, Arcadia, I should say.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a bit of a backdrop. And one thing you find is during this time, and particularly among many as many books on that I've read, and documentaries, there was this, and I think it was somewhat justified, because you did have series of massacres, particularly during the Wars of Religion, which comes off the back of all this, of where Protestants were slaughtered in France. There was this fear in England, in particular. I mean, relatively recently, of course, you had the gunpowder plot. There was this fear that the Catholic monarchs of Spain or France or what have you would try and invade and reestablish Catholic rule. Um, Whether that was realistic or true or not, I mean, after the Armada and everything for Spain, no, that wasn't going to happen. Um, there was no way for that had to happen. When it came to France, I mean, they engaged in a couple of conflicts, I believe, in Germany and also against the Ottomans at this point. So France at this point was very much um, occupied with conflicts elsewhere in Europe. Um, and also, it's probably just another important moment. Under James II, the Royal Navy wasn't the Royal Navy that we would, know in the following century as this large and very efficient, um, powerful navy that could rival other powers. In many ways, it was the Dutch Navy. The Dutch Navy was considerably larger, better equipped. I mean, one thing you do notice under James, and whether this is a result of his policies or Protestant elements within his army, that where the system at the time, the government mechanisms just refused to operate. But the army's quite poor equipped, poor training, a lot of mutinous, militant Protestant behavior, and same in the Navy. There was even a time where there was a mutiny where one of the captains um, of one of the ships wanted to perform a Catholic mass, and the sailors basically sort of staged somewhat of a strike slash mutiny, which resulted in James having to intervene in that.
During the Anglo-Dutch Wars, when the Royal Navy was so badly run that the Dutch were able to sail up the Medway and burn half the Royal Navy on one occasion. Almost as badly run as the Royal Navy is today, when the Royal Navy almost doesn't exist today. It's been almost totally destroyed by the British by successive British governments of both the so-called Conservative and the Labour Party. The Royal Navy, we'll talk about this next week when we do our Trafalgar Day stream at some length, but the Royal Navy is one of the most successful military forces in the world, and it's been destroyed by its own government, basically, not by enemies. But in the 17th century, the Royal Navy was so badly run, the Dutch Navy was able to sail up the Medway and burn half of it. And the main point I was going to make is that on certain occasions during the Dutch Wars, the British Royal Navy was actually, or English Royal Navy, I should say back then, was actually allied with the French against the Dutch. So,
yeah, and then I think it was later on or towards the end of the war we actually switched to the Dutch side. I think it was
and of course,
1670.
and also later on, we had Pepys, the famous diarist, became one of the administrators of the Royal Navy, and this was the time when it was gradually turned into an efficient military service. But
yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, I will start like timeline events soon, but one thing that I will say is as like a final bit is it. There may be an assumption that James was pally with King Louis of France, which is true. They were friendly and friends. But even James, and I will sort of defend him on this point, he did not fully trust France in all its actions, and he was he wasn't heavily reliant on outside help and influence. It could be because of what happened with his father, Charles I, during the Civil War, and saw what happened there, where there was a lot of outside influence that it alienated. I think one of the problems that James faced was there was this sense of he did start to alienate too many powerful people at once within the kingdom. And it got to the point where, even to the point where um, uh, William had landed at Torquay, and he tried to, what was it, agreed to like the bishops' previous demands of the Protestant bishops. But by then, it was too late at that point. The die had already been cast.
I would just say, and welcome Rupert August, by the way. I would just like to say, I contrast this a little bit, the glorious revolution of 1688 with the Monmouth Rebellion and the infamous Battle of Sedgehill. I think
Sedgemoor. Yeah, that's
Sedgemoor,
right.
I beg your pardon.
Sedgemoor.
And of course the Judge Jeffreys bloody assizes and all the rest of it after it. And you had people like the Duke of Marlborough, Winston Churchill's famous ancestor, who of course was one of the commanders against the Duke of Monmouth. But later on, people like him completely deserted the king in order to go over to William of Orange. But hopefully,
he was the main one. He was one of the most notable. I mean, he was the commander of the military, the English military, to defect, to swap sides, and we will talk about, because in some ways it was actually more. I mean, I was looking at it. William's landing at Torquay. I mean, yes, he had an army. It was unlike Monmouth, because Monmouth landed at Lyme Regis, same in the West Country, in Dorset, and he only landed with what was it, about 80? I think it was 85 men, and the idea was that he would contact local politicians within Somerset, Dorset, get the militias, raise up the militias, and he did raise a couple thousand. He was building an army.
Very badly equipped, as I understand AI.
Yeah.
They didn't have many muskets or the stuff you need to fight with.
No, they didn't. They had I mean they had pikes, they had converted scythes and farming equipment. I will say that there is this that I guess this sort of myth that a lot of them were peasant field hands. Most of them were not that. They were actually skilled. A lot of them were craftsmen. So there was like a sort of mixture of tools. They were actually, they did have like professions that they derived from, in that force. But yeah, I mean, overall they weren't, weren't trained. And the problem that they had at Sedgemoor was, there was because of the time in the morning, there was this well, you have because I live very very close to the battlefield, so I mean, without doxing myself too much, if when you see it, you do have earlies in the morning, particularly that time of year, like this sort of low
Mist.
hanging mist. You have these reams, which are basically like water dikes,
Yeah,
which
they're big
crisscross.
drainage channels that are actually quite deep, I understand.
They are very deep and they're very hard to see if you don't know the area too well and if you're walking, which of course the battlefield to get to, they would have walked. One of the problems is the cavalry were on the wrong side on a series of reams, and the cannons were because of I think it was because of the some logistical problem. The rebels didn't have the cannons up, so they had just pikemen and their musketmen up right at the front of the start of the battle. But the king troops, because he was already in Western Zoyland, they had set up in the village of Western Zoyland. They had already had position from the night before. They had their cannons in place, they had their cavalry, and they had their infantry and pikemen and so on. And it didn't last particularly long. The cavalry were pretty much blown away, and everything else, and they retreated. A lot of them legged it, as you would imagine. And
Very, very low training, as I understand, on Monmouth's side. Um, and as you say, a lot of the guys ran away basically because quite quickly it was obvious they were going to lose. And so a lot of these guys were killed and wounded as they were running away. And then, of course, you had the infamous Judge Jeffreys sitting at the bloody assizes afterwards. And as I say, as somebody who doesn't know a lot about this period, and I'm quite frank about this.
I can tell you a bit about Judge Jeffreys. So he hit the trials with Judge Jeffreys began now Monmouth. He was taken back to London,
Yes.
and he was beheaded there for treason.
Took them quite a few times to separate his head from his body, as I understand.
Yes. Some of the regulars, so people who were captured, were hung at the nearby the nearby village of Western Zoyland, at the church there, or in the churchyard. You have several trees. They were hung from the trees. Some of the captives, for trial, because there were trials around the West Country, like in Dorset. Some of them were taken to taken to Wells, to the abbey there. Sorry, cathedral, I should say. Sorry, the cathedral there, and they were kept there. And then the large bulk of them were taken to Taunton as well. Quite a few. The officers were pretty much were executed, hung, or beheaded, depending on their station and rank in society. The common types that were captured, a lot of them were, I'd say quite a few of them who were avoided being hung were actually deported to the Caribbean, or to North America, to the colonies there.
Yes, yeah, I thought that. Could I just interrupt you a minute, AI, just
Go
to
ahead.
welcome Rupert August? And Rupert, we're we're just up to Monmouth's rebellion, as you can probably hear. Would you like to add anything about this early period?
Yeah, thank you for the welcome. Sorry I'm a bit late. Not much to add on Monmouth, no. I think it is interesting that they had this this sort of opportunity. Well, not even opportunity, but they do fairly successfully, as far as I can tell, root out a lot of the potential dissident elements that would, threaten James II, and yet, a few years later, we'll get there, I'm sure. But
yeah,
you'd think ordinarily
that's what I find interesting about Monmouth's rebellion. As I was just saying to AI before you joined us, you have people like Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, the future Duke of Marlborough, who were like mad keen for killing Monmouth's guys, who of course switched sides later on.
Yeah, I mean that's the key thing that we're going to get to, is that the supporters that sort of enabled this crackdown and then later turn on James II, that is.
I think it's important to remember, because of course you had in Parliament, you had the Whigs, who were the Protestant faction. They were the Protestant faction, very anti-Catholic, hostile to Catholicism. You had the Tories, where you had sort of moderate. You had a faction of Tories who were high church Anglican, Catholics, crypto Catholics, some very much in favor of James, and then you did have a couple ones dissenters. I'll mention one in particular that's quite important to the Glorious Revolution shortly. And so that was sort of the political makeup. I will just start though quick. One thing I would actually make one comparison is, if you remember modern day comparison, is if you look at Assad in Syria, he fought series of rebellions by various Islamist groups within the country, and it was seamlessly one particular group, the one that's now governing that country now, which had considerable help from it appears outside interests, and also outside interests, and also it at the same time Russia and Iran, particularly Russia, started pulling support from the country. His regime just collapsed really without a fight. There was no major battle in Syria where Assad lost or anything. And it's similar with the Glorious Revolution.
The military forces just deserted, basically. Yeah.
They deserted. The police left. And similar thing here happened here. I mean, so what I'd say is, to start with, so this is how William comes into this. So in 1677, James's elder daughter, and presumably the heir, the parents at the time, Mary, is married to William III, Orange Nassau, who's the stadtholder of the main provinces within the Dutch Republic. So that is that is hold on a sec. That's like Zeeland, Holland, Utrecht, and the main provinces within the Dutch Republic. And so that's how they come into this. And one thing that I guess the Protestant faction and the Protestants within England and Scotland were content with was, well, it doesn't appear that James is going to have a male heir. When he goes, Mary will come in, and we will have we don't really have anything to particularly worry about. And also, when James did become king, he did, and I think he put an emphasis on this. He protecting the rights of the rights and freedoms and the station of the Anglican Church, the Protestant Church and everything. So promising to defend it. I mean, you did have the obvious contradiction is, how can how can a Roman Catholic defend and uphold and presumably lead a a the Anglican Church, which is at this point a Protestant institution. How by majority, how can that happen? So this was something that many of his detractors would sort of point to.
It's probably worth mentioning that, of course, that during this period, although the monarch of England was also the monarch of Scotland, this is before the Act of Union, and so Scotland was still a separate country with its own parliament. And whilst the lowlands of Scotland were even more Protestant than the English, if that's the right way of putting it, because they were, Covenanters and all the rest of it. The Highlands of Scotland, of course, were still largely Catholic at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, in Scotland, you had the 1681 Succession Act, which was basically this was Scotland. This was the Scottish Parliament confirming to support James, regardless of his religion. So this was specifically, them sort of stating that he would support them as long as two-way supporting, regardless of his religion, being that a Roman Catholic. And he was married to Mary of Modena, which was who I think she remained childless for some time. Hence why there was many didn't think there was going to be any sort of heir or conflict with anything that would conflict which would come into question Mary's succession.
I was just going to say, I just out of interest, my old British Army regiment's first battle honour was from Charles II's time, because he was married to Catherine of Braganza, I believe, Portuguese, I think. And of course, Britain got Tangier as part of that. So my old British Army infantry regiment's first battle honour was Tangier, because that was and it was Britain fighting against the Moors, of course, in that part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite interesting because, like, even in Ireland, the Church of Ireland, the Protestant Church of Ireland, were very supportive of James, because they relied on the rights and privileges of that being upheld as well. And then, of course, because the Church of Ireland, Ulster at that point, was predominantly Presbyterian. Church of Ireland as well exists up there, but they also in the Pale, so around Dublin area, around that, they relied on the sort of privileges there. Of course, though, this sort of I guess going to say harmony would end, because I mean, you did have and this is obviously the sort of laws that were in place which prevented Catholics and barring them from serving in the military or holding public office, and even land ownership. I am uncertain how it was in each kingdom, though. In England and Scotland, I think there was some. I think when it came to military, I think that was universal, but it was rolled back. I should say, you would start to see it being rolled back under James, which is one of the point of contentions within the morale within the military in England.
It wasn't always enforced. I've got to say that even amongst officers, in the Royal Navy and the British Army. Although officially you couldn't be a Catholic, there were certainly Catholic officers in both the British Army and the Royal Navy who just kept it quiet. And if you did that, you probably weren't going to get in trouble.
I mean, there was.
I mean, you weren't going to become a general. Don't get me wrong, or an admiral. But if you were a lieutenant or even a captain in the army, or a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, if you were a Catholic and you kept it quiet, you were probably nothing much was going to happen to you. That was always relatively common, even though strictly speaking it was illegal.
Oh yeah, I mean, you definitely had crypto Catholics in,
Yeah.
even in Parliament. I mean, I think one of the earls in England at the time was, supposedly a sort of crypto Catholic.
Well, I mean, look at people like the Arundels, for example, who were always one of the leading Catholic families in England, for sure.
Yeah. No.
But yeah, anything you want to add to this, Rupert?
Yeah, it's a little bit past now, but I did want to push back a little bit on the parties divide, because that really hadn't been set in stone properly until after the Glorious Revolution, and so that was significantly less formalised at this point. And another point as well is that the Tories, although there was some Tories that were kind of more amenable to Catholicism, by and large, the Tories were often even more anti-Catholic than the Whigs, such as they were at this point. And typically the proto-Whigs, let's say, leaned more in the Protestant / dissenter category, and the Tories tended to be a little bit more Anglican. Well, they were predominantly Anglican, but yeah, like I said, on the whole, they ended up tending to be more anti-Catholic, and more anti-Catholic than the Whigs were, the proto-Whigs. So, and that is pretty vital in understanding the whole thing, I think, because most of the big players who really push this from behind the scenes, or well, not even behind the scenes eventually, but a lot of the big names are slighted in one way or another by the overt Catholicism that James at times is trying to push a little bit too hard. So in particular, so that is essentially the reason why Charles Talbot, later first Duke of Shrewsbury, ends up being pushed. I mean, maybe there's some other reasons that I'm not aware of, but my understanding is that that's basically what pushed him into the opposition camp when he'd previously been. I mean, again, he'd been one of the officers who suppressed the Monmouth Rebellion, but because he'd converted to Anglicanism and was pressured by James II into renouncing Anglicanism and reverting to the Catholicism which he was born under, or which he was born to, that pushed him into the camp of dissenting, and he became one of the primary figures of the Glorious Seven. No, the Immortal Seven, rather. Sorry, who were obviously the people who formally invited William.
Most interesting, Rupert. As I said, I'm by no means any sort of expert on this era, so I'm quite happy for you and AI to hash this stuff out, because like I say, this is not an era of British history I have any great knowledge of. So you guys carry on, please.
The only other point was just that Churchill was quite a what would you call it, Catholic phobe. He didn't much like Catholics either, and I think that was one of the main things that pushed him over to the other camp as well, when he'd otherwise been renowned for being one of the most loyal to the royalist cause.
Yes, I mean, it was strange, the areas that were picked for the points of uprising, so like the West Country, for example, or the Northeast, or certain areas of Scotland, were picked because of their the Protestant nature, the sort of and more radical elements that were loyal, that would be the areas which were hostile to James, even in that honeymoon period. were also areas which were, particularly in the southwest, were extremely loyal to the royalist cause, to Charles, to his father. So it's quite funny how you have certain towns and villages who, from one generation, were extremely loyal to the royalist faction during the Civil War, but then became incredibly hostile to his son, later down the line.
I don't know for sure, but I would suspect that, again, this religious element probably has quite a lot to do with that. So if these were Anglican strongholds, then it stands to reason that they would be very loyal to Charles I, but very negatively disposed towards James II.
Yes. I mean, Taunton, for example, where Monmouth was actually publicly proclaimed king, and his intention to be crowned king, at that time was a massive area for Puritan, even at this time, Puritanism, which at this point was, still present in that part of the West Country.
Once again, though, my understanding is that a lot of these types of much more starkly dissenting groups, religious denominations, were so far from the norm that they almost became circled back around to being relatively apathetic to Catholicism, at least by comparison, because I don't know the specific reasons, but I would speculate that it's to do with them essentially considering everyone else so far from themselves, both Protestants and Catholics, that they don't really draw as stark of a distinction between the different groups. Whereas the Anglicans, they tend to feel a lot more strongly towards the Catholics.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it is worth going into detail. I mean, I use Taunton for example. I mean, even before the Reformation, there was strong presence of Lollards and Wycliffe's writings. I mean, it is interesting to that on even leaps back in generations, there is kind of this not so much and dissenting from Catholicism even then, in what would have been heresy, classed as heresy at that point. But yeah, no, it is interesting. Looking at that. Actually, as well, we're still on the topic of religion, so we talk about the backing that James had, from 1685. I think the first sort of sort of time where he started having push was when he suspended Parliament in November 1685, um, or sorry, no, hold on a second. I've sort of jumped ahead a bit. We'll talk about the Test Act, because that is I'll start with the Test Act. So this was, and this is depending on historian, but this is seen by quite a few modern historians, people like David Starkey, and even today, that the Test Act was a way of James to promoting Catholicism in the realms of England and Scotland, and it was a way that he wanted this to be passed through both parliaments, and both parliaments refused these Test Acts, which resulted in him suspending Parliament in 1685, and basically ruled by decree. And what he used as mechanism to rule was the royal prerogative, which is what is used today. And actually, very quickly, if we cast our minds back to the proroguing of Parliament when with Boris Johnson, he used that same mechanism was used to by him. The Supreme Court then said that was unconstitutional, which was bizarre because I mean that uh, uh, um I mean, I mean, technically, if you argue, what we have now is at that point the king. We're talking about in the 17th century, the king is sovereign, no parliament's sovereign, and today in the 21st century, actually, it's the courts and the lawyers and such are now the sovereign.
Although to be fair, AI, the British Supreme Court is a Tony Blair creation, which is completely alien to the British Constitution. I mean, to be
Yeah,
fair.
yeah. I mean that's why it was so ridiculous watching this, because it and you had a lot of people who were educated in constitutional affairs and historians and stuff who were deliberately um ignoring events like this, for example, of previous precedent where royal prerogative has been used, can be used. And then technically, if when it comes to royal prerogative, it means as well that if at this point, if a king who's the sovereign, what wishes X to be done, if you don't follow it, that is or you try and reverse it, or you refuse that order, I mean that is technically an act of treason. And so punishment would have been dished out hypothetically in that scenario.
Isn't am I not right in saying, gents, that it was Tony Blair who got rid of execution for treason? And I think he was. I can see why he did that, given he was one of the biggest traitors in British history. You know, and there's 1,000 years of British history, so if you're a big time traitor in that 1,000 years.
He got rid of the law that was reserved. The death penalty, of course, was abolished decades earlier, but there was, in time of war and stuff, if someone committed an act of treason, the death penalty was still on the table. But I mean, not only did he move.
Blair got rid of that, and I think that's quite telling because, as I say, I certainly regard Tony Blair as one of the biggest traitors in British history. So.
Well, it wasn't just the death penalty; they actually got rid of the concept of treason.
Well, again, makes sense if you're Tony Blair, one of the biggest traitors in British history. So yeah,
they got rid of it. I mean, now most people, if they're charged, it's usually like for espionage or.
Guys, I need to interrupt you. I've just remembered something. On our stream on the weekend, I got 2 super chats which I missed because I just didn't see them before the end of the stream, and so I just want to go through those because I very much appreciate it when people support the channel. Or ask super chat questions, and you can do so via Entropy. It's pinned at the top of the chat. The first one I got was from Gerin, who is a regular supporter of the stream, and he just sent us $5 United States and just said hello. And the other one was from Parakeet Patel, who also sent us $5, and he said, "Good evening, Saz. I am returned from my yearly tour in Kashmir to give you our government's tithe." And he sent us $5 for that. And so thank you, Gerin and Parakeet Patel. Your support of the channel is much appreciated, guys. And the money simply goes back into me paying for StreamYards and Twitter X, basically. So just goes straight back into the channel. Sorry, I didn't want to forget those because I did forget them on.
I mean, sticking with the legal stuff, James also dismissed judges who disagreed or attempted to, in his mind, subvert his decrees. So that, I mean, again, that's something you afterwards you just, even to this day, you don't see judges don't get sacked. They retire if they even if they mess up, the judge gets sacked or dismissed.
Sadly.
Sadly. I mean, you make of that what you will. And in this, because Parliament had been dissolved, there was an attempt by the king to create this sort of alliance called the King's Party of many different groups within society. Um, Rupert, correct me if I'm wrong. Include like non-conformist Quakers, figures like this, if I remember correctly.
I wouldn't necessarily be overly surprised, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Let me just have actually hold on. Let me just have a quick look.
One of the things while AI is looking stuff up, I'd be interested to know what you chaps who know much more about this than I do. Obviously, the two major things in the so-called Glorious Revolution were religion, which I'm fairly sure was the main one, but obviously there was also a degree of limiting the monarch's power and putting him very firmly under Parliament. And I'd be interested to hear you chaps discuss the importance of those two things and how they were related.
I mean,
I don't know that it was specifically about reining in the powers. I mean, that might have been part of the pitch, but obviously, intuitively, it's an extension of the Civil War, but it also is. But like more specifically, it is in the sense of trying to appeal to the Netherlands as a model. I believe that might actually be why they took on the color orange. The parliamentarian cause did, and I think some of the leading intellectual figures of the early movement were very enamored and like directly took inspiration from the Netherlands as what they kind of wanted to achieve. So the choice of trying to invite the the king of the Netherlands or the stadtholder of the Netherlands to come and rule Britain is not an incidental choice, and it kind of furthers those existing links that already existed between the parliamentarians over the long term and the Netherlands.
Sure. AI, what do you think about that?
I mean, the faction in England, the sort of Protestant, hostile to James at this point, and wanting William and Mary to depose him, definitely. And this is sort of what was being, in sermons, particularly around the country. Was that look at France? France was slaughtering Protestants. It was that Louis was under this autocratic regime. You had the sort of reign of bloodshed by the papists, and so from that perspective, I guess if they made any arguments on limiting the monarch's power, they'll say, well, look at this autocrat in France who was, where the French kingdom was becoming ever more centralized than it had been in its history. I mean, what's quite ironic is we talk about being centralized. When William and Mary actually were successful in the Glorious Revolution, the kingdoms of England, Scotland, Ireland did become more centralized anyway. It actually became very centralized, of course, because then you would have the creation of the Union of the Crowns. So there was the but also people at the time were very, very skeptical and hostile of like an army. I think it was James's army was about 30,000. He wanted to expand it along with the navy. They were very skeptical of that because standing armies, particularly these large armies, brought back the memories of the Civil War and the chaos that derived from that.
Yeah, but he'd already sort of broken the back of that stipulation. So that was an initial requirement on the return of Charles II, but that had already been basically overridden by the point, and that's part of the irony of the whole thing is that the fact that most of his professional army flipped on him is essentially what sealed the deal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rupert, that it's ironic because of course when William becomes king, England is immediately involved in wars. and
Yeah,
therefore needs a larger standing army than it had. So, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say there's another thing about all of this is the like one of the, I guess, geopolitical hysterias of the time was the threat of the so-called universal monarch, and it is often forgotten that I'm not sure if it was the earliest proposed incarnation of that was actually, or just one in a succession, was actually the Dutch Republic during the later stages of the Dutch Golden Age. So, if you're taking the idea, if you're taking that idea seriously, then why invite the Dutch and have them become even more powerful and invite them to dominate over England? Now, granted, the consensus on that had sort of flipped, and it was the fear was now that France was more so in that position. But it's literally only 10 or so years prior to the Golden Revolution. You still have people worrying about the Dutch being the overbearing power that's going to take over the world. It's not a neutral geopolitical choice to appeal to them in that sense. There's definitely some ideology going into it.
AI, what do you have to say on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would, as I said earlier, the England. I think, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we can't really look at this. I don't think the figures that wanted William and Mary over they weren't actually. I mean, yes, they wanted a monarch, but they didn't want a monarch, if that makes sense. They didn't want, at the end of the day, Parliament as it would be sovereign. It wouldn't be a monarchy in the sense of people in the previous monarchs and people at that time would understand. In other parts of Europe would understand it to be this wasn't this was in many ways this was just they say a revolution. It was more like an internal coup within the the English and Scottish state to expunge.
I'd be interested what you, AI, and also Rupert have to say on this. I mean, from my limited understanding of this period, one of the things about William becoming the king of England and Britain was that he had to accept a much more limited amount of power than had previously been the case. But I could be totally wrong on that, and that's why I'm asking.
Well, yes,
compared
to previous monarchs, and I mean also Mary and William were appointed joint. They were actually like equal joint monarchs as well. So it wasn't exactly traditional in that sense that this wasn't. If you remember when the Queen died, and you had the affirmation of our current king to parliamentary leaders and peers, that bit where he went up and he swore that he would uphold true Protestant faith and rights and sovereign in the parliament and everything. That is that harkens back
he
to
might have
that.
fibbed a bit there, AI. If you
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
me, but,
Oh God, I wish he built truth to the true Protestant faith. Yeah, yeah. Obviously, but that's that sort of ritual that you saw there, in the I think a few days after the death of the Queen, that harkens back to what William and Mary did with Parliament. Swore to uphold the rights and privileges of Parliament, and so on and so forth.
I thought that was actually later. I mean, only formalized later, at least. So obviously, that's at least part of the intention when it comes to William. But my understanding was that was not formalized until just prior to George I.
Yeah, that's correct. The only reason that was required for by William, I think they required it was because he had an army, and there was still, he had an army basically, and there was still a bit of concern that he's not going to go like absolutist route. Or there was reminding him, that um, you know that this is a deal you have to uphold. The
Well, no, I
same
mean
was
that part was backed up by the commission purchase system, with the idea being that if people who are wealthy civilians are the ones in charge of the army, then they would have more attachment to civil rather than military, or the hierarchy of the military, and that would be their overriding concern, rather than just getting wrapped up in an internal military culture, or an internal reward system that could be manipulated by a king to secure more power for himself. So that part in theory was already laid down.
I was referring to his force that he brought from the Netherlands. The various Dutch and German, French Protestants, so people who were. I mean, you could argue it was somewhat of a mercenary army, but
I was going to say that would not be able to overpower the English army at the time.
No.
And of course, the guy who was deposed ended up bringing French troops into the country as well certainly into Ireland.
What, James? Yeah. The lead up to like the Battle of the Boyne. I see. There's Ulsterman in chat there. I say I mentioned Battle of the Boyne in breaking out in song in a minute. So one thing I will talk about is that Henry Compton, the Bishop of London, was suspended by King James, for refusing to ban John Sharp, who was preaching a. I believe he was he Archbishop of York at the time? I think he. No, I think he later became Archbishop. So John Sharp later became Archbishop of York, but he was preaching basically some strong anti-Catholic sentiment, and the king ordered Henry Compton to suspend him from preaching, and he refused, and so he was suspended. And at the same time, or roughly at the same time, you had an ecclesiastical commission in 1686, which was set up to discipline the Church of England, and Catholics, sort of like crypto Catholics, like the Earl of Huntingdon. And what you had was, at the same time, you had him also introducing, or basically wanting him to. This is where the king, I should say, King James, was basically putting forward or forcing to elect Catholic sympathizers to positions like Magdalen College in Oxford. He wanted Catholic figure, Anthony Farmer, as president. But that there was pushback, and he was unable to take up that position. Elected, because I think that was an elected position within the sort of faculty there. Instead, it was John Hugh who was elected to that position. And James took that one personally, because he actually demanded. I think he demanded, like, James Hugh and the fellows at Oxford there from Magdalen College to sort of basically crawl on their knees in apology, due to being insulted, or the sort of sense of being insulted. So that that was just one of the main sort of affairs. I will say, going back to what I was saying, I was doing a bit of research, just quick, of the King's Party. It was made up of uh, small elements of like English Catholics, uh, High Church Anglicans, Nonconformists, Quakers, and those sorts of groups. So it was a really, really sort of like a bizarre faction, which couldn't really agree on anything for obvious reasons, and wasn't very the idea was that they wanted the king to remain in place, but at the same time, at this point, you did have what seemed to be the king wanting certain Catholics in these sorts of positions, whether it be like the president of Magdalen College in Oxford, or certain Protestant preachers being suspended from preaching. So that did cause a strain, I guess you could say, on the Protestant side of things, and build up anger.
I will say, in order to have something like the King's Party, it would have to necessarily be, especially as a public entity, it would have to be a cross-denominational group, because otherwise it would almost validate things like the Popish plot, or the conspiracies, or the ideas of conspiracies of Catholics trying to reimpose Catholicism, because at that point it's basically what it would be, right?
Well,
if
yeah,
it was completely public of like just a bunch of Catholics.
yeah. It is quite funny because you had like Quakers and Nonconformists, and I at that point I'm they must I'm just having a look here. They like made up like, I mean, Nonconformists made up like 4% of the population. Like, I mean, it's not exactly like and there was quite a few of them in the King's Party. So I'm wondering if some minorities, the Quakers included, may have been a bit overrepresented in the King's Party.
I mean, yeah, inevitably, it's almost like in the modern day, just trying to like scour the ranks of ethnic minorities for people who are a little bit right leaning, and then put them on a pedestal, or put them into some kind of position to champion them for the right. The certain types of centre rightists who just gush over that kind of thing. Same impulse, I think.
Yeah, you create a coalition of minorities to stand against the majority in society.
Would you guys kind of like, for those of us who don't know much about this, and that includes me, would you chaps like to kind of give us a rundown of the actual events that led to William landing at Torbay?
Yeah, I can give. Got my notes here. So just of course, we mentioned the Monmouth rebellion, so that failed. So what you I'm gonna skip like the Louis XIV like tariffs on Dutch herring imports. I'm gonna skip that bit because that's probably not relevant to this bit. So William's invasion, and the plan was
Actually,
in
one
effect.
other background thing, if you don't mind, before we get into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it is sort of relevant to what you just said, in that, like, it might not seem directly relevant, but for a long time, as in over the course of the entire Restoration period, there had been an almost Cold War going on, with England being the battleground between Dutch influences and French influences. So, interestingly, quite a lot of what is of the moral debauchery and excesses that are associated with the period are actually a front for some of this influence. So you'd have courtesans, like courtesans, essentially acting as, or like mistresses acting as essentially spies, passing messages back and forth, and monies and all that kind of thing. So, for example, I believe one of the reasons why
Nell Gwyn, Rupert, yes, people like Nell Gwyn, etc.
So, one of the reasons I believe that Charles II didn't struggle for money quite as much as his predecessors was subsidies that he was receiving from Louis XIV, and this hadn't come to light until much later, when people were sort of, funnily enough, private collectors basically bidding on like letters and things, sometimes still sealed letters that were in the possession of either Charles II or people associated with the court, and they were expecting to find all these salacious details about mistresses and like court goings on and like all those saucy details, and instead all they found was a bunch of receipts and official secrets and notes concerning monies and things like that. So
a lot of people don't know, for example, as I said just before you joined us, Rupert, that at some stages in the 17th century, the Royal Navy was actually allied with the French.
And it Charles II's policy for most, if not all of his reign, I think.
And it was the only time Britain was, right up until the 1850s, when Britain was allied with the French during the Crimean War. So, it was the only time that Britain was allied with the French, pretty much. But most interesting.
Well, yeah. So perhaps it's not an appropriate comparison, but it is the one that comes to mind when I was reading about it. Is that there was this almost Cold War going on, where on the one hand you have France acting as almost like the pro-royalist, obviously Catholic influencing faction, and then on the other side you've got the Netherlands with their more parliamentarian-ish, although it's not quite Republican-ish, maybe not the right way of framing it at this time. It's more complicated than that, but and then obviously the more Protestant aligned faction, and both of those are sort of like warring for influence inside the English court at the time. But so little things like that about like laws concerning the French and Dutch, it should cause, in this period, it should cause one to prick up an ear, because something else, there are other things going on behind the scenes, and the mercenaries and the troops that fight on either side are sort of indicative of this struggle that's going on behind the scenes, and that obviously eventually comes out in the open, and the Dutch come out on top ultimately.
And of course, look at slightly later than this, the War of the Spanish Succession, and you've got John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, leading the Anglo-Dutch alliance against the France of the Sun King. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's actually a good point. That there was, as I say, comparing it to like a Cold War influence between France and as I said, Louis XIV. France was the home of Charles and James during their period in exile, so that close ties with the French courtiers and stuff was was known. It was known at that time.
And then exiles who were kind of more parliamentarian aligned ended up in the Netherlands, conversely.
Yes, as well. We'll mention a few of them. The Earl of Torrington, for example, was he one of the. I mean, he during. I'll mention a bit later, Duke, but the Earl of Torrington was effectively the military commander of William's force, the head military commander. He was, I think he was he arrived in Holland in the 1670s, so he was there. He'd been there for like probably about 10, 11 years at that point. So actually, just get back on track here. So leading up, in 16 in 1687, October 1687, it was announced that the Queen, so Mary of Modena, who had been, without child and also multiple miscarriages over about like 11-year period, was actually pregnant, and would give birth to a boy. And this then caused, I don't. there are some historians that said that this accelerated the plan by William and the other co-conspirators, saying, okay, that we can't wait for him. That he's got now the male heir. We can't wait for this him to pass away or something, so Mary can come in. This all needs to be acted upon that now. Um, and sort of James also at this point then wrote to Mary urging her to convert to Catholicism. Um, at the same time, in this series of letters going back and forth, as a way to still dangle the concept of still becoming heir or something like that. And by this point, there was rumors going around many courts in London, in Paris and stuff, that there was going to be a Dutch invasion of England. I think though at this point James thought it was doubtful, because the idea was that if William were to invade, it would open up the Dutch Republic to attack from France, and also so that would not, and also the size of the navy and everything, actually getting ships together, it would be a huge logistical task that it would be difficult to accomplish for the Dutch Republic at that time.
I think I mean, speaking purely from a military point of view, I think if the British people had been against William landing, I think it would have been impossible for the Dutch, to be honest. But they weren't, of course, or at least the leadership were. The so-called elites of Britain were not. Well, can't even call them so-called elites. The actual elites of Britain in those days, they were mostly in favour of William landing, and of course, this is part of the story we're trying to tell here, I think.
Yeah, and of course the at this point, the plan was underway, and so, and this was, I mean, officially more of an invitation. So the person who drafted the invitation to William was Henry Sidney, who was an English army officer and a Whig politician. Um, so um, William met with Edward Russell, who was the uh, first Earl of first Earl of Orford, and he was a Royal Naval. Excuse me, he was a Royal Naval. I'm just trying to. Let me hold on a sec. Yeah, he was a naval officer. He would later become an admiral, but he was at this point just a regular officer. And he met with William as an unofficial envoy for Whig opposition, and this was apparently the conversation was recorded by Gilbert Burnet, who was another. He was a Scottish historian, and later Bishop of Salisbury, who was fluent in Dutch. And this was where you had the formal invitation and asking for William to rescue the nation and the religion. So the religion being the Protestant religion, and wanting a date for an invasion at the end of September of 1688. William,
I wonder what these people would think today when we now have a female Archbishop of Canterbury.
well, they'd be horrified, and
I think they would be appalled, actually.
well, they'd be wanting I can't say what they might. Okay, anyway, yeah. So yes, we've William's response in this conversation was that he claimed, he says, well, he had no choice. He was being forced to take control of the conspiracy when Russell warned him because Russell said, "Listen, William, even if you don't come, the English people, the people of the Protestants of the British Isles, would still rise up and everything." And so William claims that, oh no, he was like, oh no, I have to take control now because otherwise it would all end up in disaster, like the Monmouth Rebellion.
Do you chaps think that's true? I mean, AI and Rupert. Do you guys think that if William had refused to come across, there would have been some sort of uprising in Britain, or do you think that was just nonsense?
It's hard to tell. At this point, you did have like low-level, small, like regimental, mutinies, and even a small naval mutiny. The trouble is, it could have happened. I mean, yeah, it could have happened. Maybe they would have found a different claimant. I mean, in a in like a like an alt universe, there is a scenario where they rise up, they get rid of the king, but keep the James's son, the new heir apparent, and raise him Protestant, and you're unlike like a Lord Protector or something like that. Um, I would say though the only sort of option at this point probably, and I think in their mind was because of the international political situation as well. Yeah, Mary and William. I don't believe though that William was like, this was a surprise. This was sprung upon him, and he had to, take the conspiracy. I mean,
No,
these pamphlets. Remember, these conversations were going back. They would be sort of publicized
it's
later on.
propaganda. It's
Yeah,
propaganda.
it's
AI.
propaganda because because he didn't want to appear to be. This is like it's the glorious revolution. It's an invitation. It's rescuing the nation. He doesn't want to be conflated as like an invading force. I mean, well, technically, yes, it's an invasion. It's an invading force, but it's not.
Well, look at the thumbnail for this stream. Look at all the Dutch flags on the Dutch warships. You can kind of see it is an invasion. Rupert, I was just going to ask you, mate, if William had not been willing to take over the monarchy in Britain, do you think there would have been a revolution anyway, or do you think it would have died a death, or what?
No, I think it probably would have been a lot more haphazard. Having a crowned monarch, well, a proper monarch rather, I should say, involved. That's quite an important rallying point to all of the various dissenting strains. So, and even then, even with the inclusion of William, I don't think anyone was particularly confident that it was going to result in success up until the point that Churchill flipped. So, I mean, I guess if Churchill was going to flip either way, then any slight breeze probably would have knocked James off the crown. But
that makes sense. But I'm also conscious that the English or even British Civil War was quite recent in 1688, and it was within living memory of a lot of people, and so was, of course, the dictatorship of Cromwell. I don't think that the English and British people were desperate for another civil war. I have to say, I don't think they were at all, really.
Not necessarily, but I mean, you could say the same thing to infer that the Irish would not be up for it to the same degree because of how recent the
Cromwell in Ireland, very true.
The conquest in Ireland, yeah,
exactly.
Very true.
So you'd think that they would not be up for it, but that was the place that sort of held out the.
But of course,
in
Ireland, you had you had a Catholic majority in Ireland as a whole, which I think was the crucial difference.
Yeah. I mean,
but like the fact of the Civil War being in recent memory, I mean, I don't necessarily think that was as strong of a factor in England, because England, for one thing, England suffered the least. So
we still lost quite an appreciable portion of the male population in that civil war.
I mean,
yeah, I think it was 10%. Well, a lot, I think. But
I mean, at the time, Andrew, the fear that, and this was from maybe from lay preachers on at Sunday morning in services, was that it was the fear of a vengeful and bloodthirsty counter Reformation Catholic force, particularly in from France or Spain, probably at this point from France, reasserting itself over the country and seeing on because of course news would spread from the continent, particularly the massacres in France of French Protestants and the burnings and what have you, that this would occur here, and this was a fear. There was also fears of a bit like Reds under the bed sort of stuff. Catholics, crypto Catholics. You had of course the gunpowder conspiracy within
Guy Fawkes and all that stuff. Yes.
Guy Fawkes, within the under same reign as the Stuarts. And though it was a lot earlier, but that's the 17th century is like with England, there was sort of paranoia. Even with the Great Fire of London, there were many who thought that this was done by Catholic agents to weaken the nation. This was a deliberate attempt.
Much later in the 18th century, you had the Gordon riots, of course, which were a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
Which was basically fear of popery, supposedly.
And to the credit of this paranoia, funnily enough, especially if there had been a few more Monmouth rebellions, basically, or if the Protestants had been sort of radicalized enough to start, taking matters into their own hands in a peasant revolt style. Basically, a few Gordon riots that were not that were in much more direct opposition to the crown. Then, potentially you would have some kind of like more overt, hard counter-revolution taking place, because even though James II was trying to push through Catholicizing policies in some ways, he definitely could have been a hell of a lot more draconian about it than he was. And so in the hypothetical scenario where the Glorious Revolution fails, then I think you probably do see a radicalized James, potentially cracking down even harder on some of these Protestant influences, especially the dissenters.
That might have caused a real civil war again.
Well, it depends, because if you crack down effectively, then you break the back of a potential civil war before it really gets going.
I mean, he did bring. Sorry, just quickly, he did actually bring soldiers from Ireland over to, like, you had in the English army, you did have units from Ireland, again Catholic, and you actually had like intermingled, and it resulted in some English regiments engaging in like street battles against when I say battles, I mean it was mainly like fists and club fights and stuff like that, but and it resulted in James having to send those units back to Ireland because they just wouldn't cooperate. And James had to, one thing you notice with James is he doesn't mess with the army too much. That he will be very ruthless with the politicians and courts. He would be and the bishops, but when it came to the army, he wouldn't sort of F around with them too much, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, the British Army was tiny in those days, even smaller than it is today, which is saying something. But secondly, I mean, by this time, Britain had been Protestant for 200 years, pretty much. Longer if you go back to Henry VIII. 250 years even. I don't think that James could have really totally reversed that, even had he wanted to be honest.
No, not by this point. No, and yeah, no, he couldn't have it. As I said, the only strong Catholic part of his realm was Ireland, which is
Yes,
what he would use in the future, certainly. And
which is where he ended up going to fight, and the Battle of the
yeah,
Boyne and all that stuff, which I'm sure we're going to come on to before we finish.
yeah. So I was just going to say, so I'll
Someone is
continue.
saying in the chat here that the leader of the Gordon riots, which was a chap in the 18th century, converted to Judaism. I have no idea if that's true or not. Is it?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, he converted to Judaism.
Okay.
The main figure in that. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, what can I say? Yeah.
Probably nothing on YouTube there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and nothing like.
Sounds like more ammunition to the Catholics.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, it doesn't help Protestants.
Listen, by the way, guys, I did ask Apostolic Majesty if he wanted to join this stream, and sadly, he was busy this evening because I think he would have had some quite interesting insights into some of this. But yeah, to me, as a total layman on this, and like I said, I don't know anything about this subject useful. I would just say that. There's 2 points about it. First of all, it was that the British elites didn't want a Catholic monarch. That's certainly true. And partly, as AI and Rupert have been saying, it's because of the huge power of the Sun King in France and his very much absolute monarchy. But the other thing about it is, of course, that the king lost power when William came in. He was more constrained than James was, and it was made like apparent that Parliament ruled, and the king was only the king really because Parliament allowed him to be by this stage. Unless you guys don't agree with that, I think that's what was going on, but you chaps may disagree.
Yeah, I don't entirely agree, especially on the absolutist point. That's so regarding Louis XIV. So that's essentially a propaganda point that comes out this period again in the Cold War context. Netherlands good, France bad. We'd probably have a very different perception of Louis XIV if the pro-French faction had sort of come out on top in that time period. Although to be fair, a lot of the scholarship on Louis XIV comes from much later anyway. But yeah, that's a different point. The other thing is that to my knowledge, I don't think they changed all that much. There were a few things that they trimmed around the edges to try and stop a king from being able to flip on them again, but I don't think they really affected the power of the monarchy all that much. They basically just wanted their guy in charge.
Yeah, there was no mechanism to there was no sort of mechanism because the problem was with the Commonwealth Republican system just collapsed. Like the actual system just collapsed. There was no prevailing aspect of it that sort of continue. I mean, the only thing I guess you could say was the standing army.
Yeah, I was
even
just
then,
going to AI the army estimates, which even today have to be done every year, as indeed do the things for the Navy as well. But the army estimates are still something that has to be agreed by Parliament every single year.
yeah. So that was the only thing that is mainly notable. I mean, going back, so I know that because the time stuff, I do want to talk about the invasion. So you talked about the build up to it. One figure that was important in all of this. So the decision that had been made. James has got an heir, and this was William's cousin, who operated as like a diplomat, and his name was William Hendrick, Lord of Zulestein, and also he became the Earl of Rochford later on. But I'll call him Zulestein because I don't want to confuse him with his other with William that we're talking about, even though they're both called William. So Zulestein, he operates as a diplomat and going back and forth, and he did do and probably met with conspirators in England, but also like polling at the same time the you know what the general mood was. Now, in early 1688, so we're getting closer to this. There was a pamphlet circulating around England written by a Dutch Grand Pensionary, Gasper Fagel, where he was actually pointing out that William would support the freedom of worship for dissenters and retaining the Test Acts, unlike James. And so this was like a clear sort of, in my mind, a clear indication of what sort of the plans were afoot. And so this is where it came to the planning, where I talk about Edward Russell, and the meeting there. So that officially took place. Um, and you had the so Zulstein returned to England in June, where he congratulated. This is funny because he actually congratulated James on his son, while at the same time he was there, to meet with William supporters, and drafting later doing a further redraft of the invitation, and by Henry Sidney. And then the Whig historians would call Sidney the great wheel of which the revolution rolled this particular period of the invitation of William. The people in place were they weren't like notable politicians, but they were high sort of figures within society. So this was, you had uh, Thomas Thomas Osborne Danby, or the first Duke of Leeds. He was a Tory, and also Devonshire Whig Henry Compton, and Bishop of London as well, who we mentioned earlier. And then for the so this was like you had representatives of Parliament, both sides of Parliament, the Church, and also you had Charles Talbot, the Duke of Salisbury, and Richard Lumley, the first Earl of Scarborough, who represented the army.
Talbot rather was Earl of Shrewsbury.
Did I say Shrewsbury?
You said Salisbury.
Did I? Oh, sorry. No, yeah.
No, it doesn't matter.
Shrewsbury. Yes, sorry. I meant to say Shrewsbury. Yes.
I'm from and in Shropshire, so he's
okay.
one of my
I
anchor
do.
points of this period.
Sorry, I do apologise. I mix that one up. Shrewsbury and Lumley for the army, and then of course Russell and Sidney for the navy. So you had all branches of the state sort of in this invitation. And they promised to support the Dutch landing. But the thing is, because of the birth of the heir, they were all wanting this to be done, like yesterday. The invitation was carried back to the Hague on the 30th of June by Rear Admiral Herbert, who was the first Earl of Torrington, and he was dismissed by James the second. So he was like one of the people that sort of gone over to Holland already. And he was disguised. He actually did this travel disguised as a common sailor, And one of the allies that William, the cousin William, had sort of got to start getting the propaganda machine going was a chap called William Bentinck, the first Earl of Portland, who was he was Dutch, but he was in the English court. He was in English court, and he sort of began this propaganda campaign in England, which presented him as the true Stuart, but one without faults. Um, and sort of bigging up, I guess I don't know using the term bigging up, but bigging up the idea of William becoming king, and trying to draw that legitimacy from his wife as the true heir, and the only rightful heir, that sort of stuff. So that was the propaganda wing of this. I was going to say at this point, the France was already in conflict elsewhere in Europe. So the initial invasion in September was, I believe, it was halted due to. This was it, yeah. So France was engaged in Belgrade, fighting in Belgrade against the Ottomans. So this was this is when the Dutch became a bit more relaxed because the main bulk of the French army was elsewhere at this point. But France started to suspect, and Louis started to suspect an invasion because I believe they seized. And I was gonna say they seized like um 100 Dutch ships, many of owned by Amsterdam merchants, and this one's quite important because the state of Holland, which was the most powerful body of the Dutch Republic, which contributed nearly 60% of its budget to the Republic, basically paid for many of the ships, troop transport, and those equipment and what have you for this endeavor. And so
September's very late in the year, by the way, AI for crossing
it
the
it,
channel.
it is, and this thing is France.
Like
Both
even today, you'll find that the invasion small boats that come over constantly every single day to Britain from France with the illegal economic migrants on board, they tend to stop in September because the channel gets too rough.
Yeah. Now, and then just so quickly on this point, as you mentioned, at this particular time in September, because we were going into late September, early October at this point, nobody in the French court, like the various government figures, and in Britain, in England as well, there was this idea that there was the time had passed. The summer had gone. We'd gone into autumn. It was approaching winter. There won't be an invasion because it wouldn't be the right time. The seasons and everything. So this was there was this I'd say relaxed view, but James was becoming more and more cautious that them. It was more that Louis was believing that yeah, there wasn't going to be an imminent invasion as that they had thought, and maybe that was a bit of disinformation on the Dutch part. I don't know. That there was a
Would
lot of.
AI, would you and Rupert care to just briefly go over the course of the actual invasion and
Oh no,
what?
that's what that's what I'm getting to now. That
Yeah, yeah, cool.
I do apologize, but the reason I'm getting this in order because otherwise this might become sort of a bit confused. So I'm sort of building it up to this point here. So yeah, this was the you know, so the actual invasion, we go into the Dutch preparation. They managed to keep this relatively secret and organized the transport ships and the man of wars basically in quite sort of great speed, as one English chronicler put it. The English envoy to The Hague, to the Dutch Republic, Ignatius White, who was an Irish politician, diplomat, and also the Marquis of uh, 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 Alberville, warned, returned to London to warn the king and the country that an absolute conquest is intended under the suspicious and ordinary pretense of religion, liberty, property, and a free parliament. Now, when King Louis heard upon this, when there's that he was certain that an invasion wouldn't happen in towards late September, October at this point, that threatened a declaration of war if William proceeds and send James 300,000 liris as support. I'll just go to my next notes here. So embarkations began on the 22nd of September, and the complete and had been completed on the 8th of October. The expedition day was openly approved by the States of Holland. The same day, James issued a proclamation to the English nation that it should prepare for an imminent Dutch invasion and to ward off any conquest. So this was a giving time for him to call upon the militia, basically. This was his preparation to notify the militias as well. William issued the Declaration of The Hague, which was written by Fagel, which was the propagandist chap, in which 60,000 copies of English translation by Gilbert Burnet was distributed across England, which William ensured and promised to maintain the true Protestant religion, install a free parliament, and investigate the legitimacy of the Prince of Wales. He would would say that he would respect the position of James. So that's basically saying he wasn't going there to, he wouldn't kill James. Basically, he wasn't going to. It was just going to be he wasn't going to. It was just going to depose him. It wasn't going to end with him being beheaded or anything. Whether that's true, that's up for you guys to decide. I don't know about that bit, but
yeah, I mean, was it William himself that recently presided over the murder and cannibalization of the what were they called? Was it the DeWitts? The DeWitt brothers in the Netherlands?
Yeah. Was the cannibalization bit? Is that an urban myth, or is that, because I've heard some that said that was not, that might have just been like a bit of urban myth or something. I don't know if that is entirely true.
I don't know. It's at the very least it's attested by a contemporary painting. So
yeah. Yes, I'm sure the liberal the liberal arts the liberal arts, yeah. No.
Yeah, I don't know basically, but it makes for a better story that if it
it does. I mean, yeah, the thing is, he did play into that. He played into that rumor of him, that sort of narrative of him, and they did play into it. So the And in these sort of series of pamphlets, William, this is like while they were boarding, that was being sent out around the country. William went on to condemn James, all of James's advisors for overturning the religion, laws, and liberty of England, Scotland, and Ireland, by suspending and dispensing of power, the establishment, and basically declared it's manifestly illegal. What he had done to the Bishop of London, and also the interference in Magdalen College, and then William condemned James's attempt to repeal the Test Act and the penal laws by basically blackmailing and threatening individuals. Um, uh, and this was like one last attempt. And also James's attempt to pack Parliament with his followers. Um, William referred to this as the last and great remedy for all those evils, which was the invasion. William then also said, we have thought fit to go over to England." And so this is him speaking to his forces or pamphlet. This is the pamphlets to his men, and a speech as well. "We have thought fit to go over to England and to carry over with us a force sufficient, by the blessing of God, to defend us from the violence of these evil counsellors. This our expedition is intended for no other design, but to have a free and lawful Parliament assembled as soon as is possible." Uh, William responded to allegations by James in the Second Declaration, denying any intention to become king to conquer England. So this is bizarre, because William, during this period, even during the invasion, was denying that he wanted to become king. This is like this is where it does get a bit confusing. This is why I wanted to build up Iron Duke, because he does deny, even at this point, he wants to be king. Maybe he wanted to put his wife on the throne. I don't know. I don't know what, or if this was his intention all along. But propaganda-wise, he was still telling English people at this point he didn't want to be king.
It is almost necessary, though, to portray himself in the way that that is desired. So if he's going to be crowned, and if he intends to be crowned, he must be crowned by the people he is liberating, quote unquote.
Yeah, true. I know, 100%. So most of the warships present. So I will say, for on William's side, you had 49 man of war and then 400 smaller vessels for like a mix of supplies and troops carrying stuff, and they did out the. So the Dutch had 49 man of war. The English navy at the time had 31 man of war, so they were outnumbered, and also the smaller vessels as well were outnumbered. And as we said, under James, the navy was and the army was quite poorly equipped. It wasn't anything that we would would be the following century, but most of the warships for William were provided by the Admiralty of Amsterdam, but it was treated. This is because, technically speaking, the Dutch Republic wasn't engaging in this invasion, even though it was their ships, it was their weapons, a lot of their men, and also their prince. This was considered officially by the Dutch Navy, government, and so on and so forth, as a private enterprise by the Prince of Orange. But in this endeavor, they did, contribute most of the Admiralty's warships did come from the Dutch Navy.
And obviously, William of Orange lands at Tor Bay. And I'm asking this for people watching this, of course, did James and his military think about trying to take them on, or?
Well, James, he did consider himself safe from invasion due to France's threat, as I mentioned earlier, and the Spanish and Netherlands. So upon the invasion, or hearing on the invasion, he did meet with the bishops on the 28th of September. So it's going back a bit earlier, but and offering them concessions, which bear in mind, if you cast us early on the stream, as a reference point, he did, you know, he was basically like locking up. Of course, he famously locked up 6 bishops. This was his sort of like a panic response in many ways to get the Protestants back on side. Though at this point it was too late. You know, that, as I said, the die had already been cast. And just getting, hold on a sec here. So Torbay was far enough from London to provide I think the idea was that if they would land at Torbay, which was in the West Country, it would allow the regime and enough time to collapse. And I think there was hope from particularly like Danby and also the Earl of Torrington. I think it was particularly the Earl of Torrington, who was the commander of the army. His idea, Iron Duke, was that if they land at Torbay and start approaching, you know, up through Exeter, up to Salisbury, and slowly move across the country, it would inspire local revolts that that James's regime would just collapse. I mean, what happened is and as well as William ordered, I think this order came from William. He didn't want to really engage with any English militiamen or army units because any sort of he didn't want to engage in any bloodshed, which is odd, you know, for an invasion force. But this was part of the propaganda campaign. He in many ways he avoided as much any fighting as possible. I don't even know if there was actually a single. I don't know if any actually shot. I mean, I imagine there may have been some sort of, you know,
bit like
physical force.
a bit like the Anschluss with Austria in the 1930s.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I imagine there may have been some sort of, you know, I don't know if a shot was fired, but there may have been some sort of like physical force used in some areas. But yeah,
I think the only serious fighting was in Ireland, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in Ireland. You know, to be honest, it was only in Ireland. I mean, his troops were quite well supplied as well. For about, I think it was supplied and paid for about 3 months. So through the entire winter months as well. On the 9th of November, they moved out from Torbay up the coast to Exeter, entered Exeter, and issued a proclamation claiming he sought only to secure the rights of his wife and a free parliament. So now he's sort of saying, well, no, we're going to depose him, and and Mary is going to be the queen. His wife's going to be the queen. What was quite funny though is the general mood, the crowd in Exeter were actually rather. There wasn't like the sort of joyful rejoicing because there was a bit of confusion because the pamphlets earlier were actually talking about how James was going to remain in position. Then there was a pamphlet saying, "No, I'm going to rescue the situation." Now I'm saying, "Actually, I'm not going to. I'm going to put my wife in charge." So there were people in Exeter during this proclamation that were rightfully pointing out the like 3 different narratives that were being spun here, and then saying, "Well, this is an invasion force." And it's like, well, there's a lot of Dutch flags. There's a lot of like Dutch and German, French Protestants in your army, William. What's this about? So yeah, but I think at this point it didn't really matter because there was nobody like in Exeter, for example, and also Salisbury, which he would let him march on to. None of the local governance figures loyal to James were actually loyal to James. As soon as that William arrived, it was like, yes, you're in charge. There was no resistance to William as he moved through England.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it helped that James himself had effectively given up as soon as he realised that Churchill had flipped.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you kind of, if you're a royalist loyalist, then you kind of have to have a king to rally around. And if your king deserts you, then what are you gonna really do at that point?
To be fair to James, now I guess the royalist argument was, I was going to say at the time was, well, he would go to Scotland to try and drum up support there. Of course, he didn't find that level of support. So yeah, I mean, yeah, but as you said, in reality, he sort of fled as soon as Churchill switched. He fled.
I'm not
I
even
will
saying
say,
that that's necessarily the wrong approach, because had he stayed, maybe he would have just been captured, deposed immediately, and everything would have been much worse for him. But it does mean that potentially the amount of support that he seems to have, or rather lack thereof, in England is potentially informed by the fact that he didn't physically stay. He was just gone immediately, basically.
now, I do want to clarify that I did actually find, I was looking through my book here I have got on the Glorious Revolution, there was one notable clash between the Royalist forces and the William Knights, as they call them, in the I was going to say in the village of Wincanton here in Somerset, and that was between Royal Dragoons clashed with Scouts at Wincanton. There was a skirmish, and I was going to say 12 were killed on the William side, and 8 were captured, and 5 were killed and wounded on the Royalist side. Battle was the skirmish, I should say, was inconclusive, but um, one of the commanders, the first Earl of Lucan, would later surrender anyway. So I guess that's technically a Dutch victory. That's a William victory.
It's a bloody small skirmish, I've got to say. But yeah, look, guys, we've gone well over 2 hours, and I'm just thinking to kind of wrap it up. I just like you guys, your views on, was this a good thing? Was it inevitable? Was it a bad thing? Whatever. I mean, AI and Rupert, what's your summing up of the Glorious Revolution and its results?
I mean, I'll make it quick because I've talked a lot throughout this, and I'll get Rupert to get say. But I mean, I think it, by the time the conspiracy was set, it was kind of inevitable that James was going to be deposed. I I mean, he had the problem that he was a Roman Catholic king in a very Protestant country, and not just with like Anglicans, but even more radical Protestants in certain regions of the country. So that was a problem, and different types as well. You had the Presbyterian, the Church of Scotland in North the Kirk, which was its own force as well. So it made it. I mean, I guess it would be difficult to govern. Just imagine like I was going to say, trying to imagine like a Protestant king trying to rule Spain or something at that time. It'd be difficult. It would be a difficult endeavor to try. So yeah, it was inevitable. I also think the probably some of the policies. He did he originally he did have the honeymoon period, as I mentioned, where a lot of the you know Anglicans, the Church of Ireland, even the Church of Scotland were on supporting him for various different reasons, whether it be his ancestral homeland of the Stuarts, or stability, wanting stability, or upholding in Ireland the rights of the Protestant church Church of Ireland and lands and titles and what have you. But he's a lot of his policies and decisions to preference of various Catholic figures, I think alienated a lot of people at a time where there was already this sort of justifiable paranoia of a Catholic takeover. I think he unfortunately played into that a lot, and that's what sort of did him in the end. And also he had he had a relative in Mary who was um, married to the Prince of Orange, who was the effectively like the main the main like the political head of the Dutch Republic in many ways. And I think if he didn't have that that uh, sort of family claimant there, maybe things would have been different as well. But I think a lot of it was his own sort of his own doing. Um, I know that's not very. I know a lot of my
Yeah, no,
friends like Plantagenet and Justine's Brown Bookshop who are more Catholic reactionaries would have a very different view. And he was done in by a Protestant conspiracy and everything, which is true. There was a Protestant conspiracy which he was done in by, but it is important to note that at the start of he was a lot of the Protestants. It was only a minority that were sort of a bit hostile towards him. The majority of his king people in his kingdoms were okay with him being there. Even if he was a Roman Catholic. I mean, they even passed a law in Scotland in the Scottish Parliament to basically accept him and his own personal faith.
yeah. I mean, that's one reason I got us to speak a bit about the Monmouth Rebellion earlier on. Rupert, what's your summing up of the Glorious Revolution?
I'm on record defending various monarchs who get a bad rap, who were deposed, but I find that James II is kind of harder to defend, and maybe that's just because I haven't read as deeply as I have with some of the other examples. But yeah, it does seem like James II made a lot of choices that did not have to be made, that alienated himself to a lot of allies. As was sort of briefly touched on, there was the sort of understanding that the king could have two persons, his private person and his public person. The private being the Catholic one, and so ruling over a Protestant nation could be rendered a non-issue by having almost like a Protestant public-facing person that acts as the king, and a private person that is Catholic. But James himself seems to have not abided by that principle when he really could have and possibly should have. In terms of how it actually went down, yeah, I mean, as was said, it literally was a conspiracy. It was an invasion by the Dutch, and simultaneously, it was also a catastrophic failure of what had previously been a fairly good power balancing strategy in this Cold War that I described, which is a major component of this whole thing. So,
for the next 60 years after the Glorious Revolution, during this time as well, you had the Act of Union, so the creation of the British state, Great Britain, but also the this would also cause the various Jacobite wars, and that impact for the next 60 odd years until the Battle of Culloden in the mid 18th century. So it has that long lasting because of the Glorious Revolution. It did Britain would then become the sort of main Protestant power would at this would over the next century overtake the Dutch. The navy would become as well as we as Iron Duke would know, and as well Rupert. It does set the stage for future endeavours.
Yeah, just quickly briefly on the point that I made earlier about France under Louis XIV being less absolutist than we're often led to believe is it would take France quite a lot longer to abolish their regional parliaments, whereas England effectively did it with the Act of Union.
I mean, ironically, the French Revolution was probably the most absolutist move. Revolutionaries were the most absolutist in some ways.
Yes, well, not in most ways.
I mean, in most ways, yeah. I mean,
it's not only the Glorious Revolution, but it does quite a lot retrospectively to color our understanding not only of that period itself, but also the preceding times and what British history actually is. So, Magna Carta was generally considered a dead letter by the time of 1688, but in 1689, it was used as the basis for the Bill of Rights. So, essentially, retrospectively, the Whigs, at this point, becoming more calcified into an actual recognizable party or feature, they're sort of rewriting English history and kind of telling us again what English history actually is and what bits are relevant and what we should emphasize and that filters through today. We basically consider Magna Carta an important document, mostly because of the Glorious Revolution and the Bill of Rights in 1689. So, although I tend not to think that anything is inevitable, and things could have gone differently, and even after 1688, things could have gone a different way, and we'd have a different understanding. As is, we kept a fairly stable course, and now that has essentially become a defining moment in what we consider to be our own history and our own identity, politically speaking.
Because I remember years ago, I actually went to I think it was like a question time debate, and Jacob Rees-Mogg was there. It was like about 4 or 5 years ago now, and actually no, sorry, what about 6 or 7 years? When was the Brexit referendum? Like 9 years ago.
2016.
Yeah, 2016. Okay, so it was about that time. And he was talking about I mean, bear in mind he's a Catholic as well, so he's a Catholic as well.
True.
But he was talking about the Bill of Rights and particularly the Constitution and everything. He very much, as you said, Rupert, basically described a version of English history that was interpreted by the Whigs, where Parliament is really the sovereign as such, as the sovereign. And I've always wondered. Something I've sort of developed is you can look at rights and privileges, and various towns and cities in like medieval Europe did have rights and privileges, but at the same time, it's not as the Whigs would. It's not as a lot of those people view it. Would understand it today. Maybe it's the confusion of when they see Republican style models. They think of Republic as like this democrat, this total democratic system where everyone is voices are equal and free and all that sort of stuff. That maybe that's why you have the confusion. But they sort of conflate the two, if that makes sense.
Yep, sure. Look, guys, we will in the future. We will absolutely do a stream on the 1745 rebellion, for example.
Battle of the Boyne. I say we could do one on the Battle of the Boyne probably at one point if
you want to do that. You let me know and I will set it up, because again, this is a subject I do not know a great deal about.
We probably I'd say we need to get an Ulsterman on.
Yeah, we might even have one in the Discord. Who knows? But yeah, we will certainly do the 1745 rebellion at some point. And I also think we should probably do the War of the Spanish Succession at some point, which of course will bring in Marlborough and the Anglo-Dutch alliance fighting against the French, with Eugenie in Austria and what have you. So yeah, we will do that stuff in due course. AI, this was your stream. Is there anything you would like to plug, sir, before we close?
Just AI Shire Homelander. Apart from that, no. Just
You got anything coming up that people should look out for?
no, nothing on my nothing on my end at the moment. I mean, I'm thinking of ideas for doing a stream. I might do. I might do actually. There's one thing I wanted to do was on like character archetypes, like you have in like novels and media and films and TV shows. Various character archetypes. I was going to look at. Like the the hero, the betrayer, the villain, the turncoat, the traitor, the redeemer, that sort of stuff.
You could illustrate most of them, except the good ones, from modern British politicians. But yeah, except the good ones, of course. Rupert, is there anything you would like to plug, sir?
Yeah, there's my channel. Not much been going on there recently, but I do still intend to come back to it at some point. And other than that, I'm involved with the Pendragon Foundation. So yeah, they've got a channel and a Twitter. Look up both of them. So,
AI's involved.
Oh yes, yes, yes.
Involved with that. That's Nathan Hood, isn't it, Rupert?
Yes,
Yep.
I do apologize. I should have promoted that when you asked me. It totally blanked out on that. Yes, Pendragon Castle Restoration. Nathan Hood has been putting out quite a bit of content. I do check out their. I'm gonna send you the YouTube channel because they've been doing some really good streams.
Yeah,
and
I'll stick it in the description after the
yeah,
stream.
because they definitely need do check it out because it's been really interesting conversations.
I've been plugging the Pendragon thing on X on Twitter, but if you send me their YouTube channel, I'll absolutely put it underneath your and Rupert August's channel in the under the stream after the stream.
Yeah, we got some good things coming out there, and yeah, some good things in the pipeline, in for real life things as well. So yeah, if anyone in the audience is interested in getting involved in castle restoration, then yeah, I can wholeheartedly encourage you to get involved, and there'll be
really good. And Nathan Hood is a good chap, so yeah, absolutely do support that, people. I will just say we'll be back on Saturday for our normal stream, of course, Saturday British time, which will be at 9 o'clock from now on, now that the clocks have changed in Britain and Australia. Also, at some stage over the weekend, I'm not quite sure what day it's going to be yet, but I'm going to be on with Morgoth and Endeavour, and we're going to be reviewing the excellent film Master and Commander. Not sure if it's going to be Sunday or Monday yet, but it'll be sometime around that there. And then next Wednesday, our history stream will be about the Battle of Trafalgar, because we're coming up to Trafalgar Day on the 21st of October. So yeah, look out for those things, people. Thank you very, very much to my guests, AI and Rupert August. And in terms of Rupert August, excellent to see you back. It's only the second time you've been on for the last few months, but then I know you became a dad not that long ago, so you know, fair enough. That takes up a lot of your time, as I well know.
Yeah, harder to find time for these things than it used to be. But
Yeah,
good,
but no,
good to be back on next time.
yeah, you're always very welcome. Okay, guys. So we'll see you on Saturday, and as I say, look out for Endeavour and Morgoth's stream in their classic movie series when we're going to be looking at Master and Commander, which is a great film, by the way. Really good. If you haven't seen it, you're missing out. All right, guys. Thank you very much, and we'll see you then. I have checked Entropy, and we don't have any super chats. I didn't miss any this week, although I did mention midway through this stream the 2 we got on the weekend. So you did get your mentions, guys. All right. Take care. I don't have a tune to play us out with this week. But do go and check out Patriotic Archives channel. He was in the chat earlier. If you like good music, he's got loads of it on his channel. So go check it out.
We could sing out with the sash my father wore, or King Billy's on the wall.
Yeah, we could, but I've got an awful voice, so I'm not going to be doing that. But
No.
You can if you want to.
No. That's okay. If there's one Ulster chap I know real life, if he was here, he would be freaking singing it like nobody's business.
It's a good tune. I do like the tune. I first played that tune when Lady Charlotte was on my channel because her dad liked it. So there we go. All right. Thanks very much to AI and Rupert August, and we'll see you on Saturday for the normal Splendid Isolation stream. Go well, people, and do not let the bastards grind you down.